Meliodas vs the 10 Commandments. What makes this fight my number 10 is the hype of it all. We have Meliodas using part of his demon powers as he goes against the 10 Commandments, direct servants of the Demon King that Meliodas used to lead. And despite being massively outnumbered and overpowered, Meliodas puts up a great fight but is ultimately killed by the Commandments, at least temporarily. This fight did a spectacular job at showing just how big of a threat they were and what we could expect in the future. Kiritsugu and Saber vs Lancer and Archibald. What makes this fight my number 9 is not only how much of a visual spectacle it is but what it did for the series going forward. It showed how ruthless Kiritsugu could be, as we were told later on in the series that he could only save people by sacrificing others. He knew no other way. That he would even go through twisted means to try to achieve peace and his desires, even if it meant interfering in a one-on-one battle between a weakened Saber and Lancer. Kiritsugu's vehemently dishonorable disruption of their fight enraged both Saber and Lancer, the latter of whom cursed him to hell. How Kiritsugu has achieved this was by permanently damaging Archibald's magic nerves and nearly killing his lover. He then forced them to make Lancer commit suicide, and then broke his promise of sparing one of them. What makes this fight my number 8 is somewhat of thematic relevance. For instance, Laxus set up as being the strongest mage, and a bit of a mystery was pretty cool. It was enjoyable seeing him go against his guild and use one of the top 3 spells to wipe them out after having them fight to the death to see who's the strongest, as, in his mind, strength is what matters. And who did Natsu team up with begrudgingly to defeat this monster? Gajiel, a former enemy and mage of an illegal guild. The arc this fight takes place in is one of Fairy Tail's better arcs, not just in general but in terms of handling Fairy Tail's ever themes of friendship. What makes this fight my number 7 has nothing to do with thematic relevancy or anything meaningful. This fight is just the pure epitome of hype. Seeing Escanor stroll up to Estarossa, and being unaffected by his commandment was just awesome. Standing a good foot or two above him, Escanor stated that he does not hate those who are weaker from him, he only pities them. At first it seemed as though Estarossa's counter would lead to an easy victory, but Escanor quickly turned the fight into a one-sided slaughter, and had Zildji's not interfered, he would have not ended in a coma, but dead. Luffy vs Katakuri. What makes this fight my number 6 is not only is it a great fight but one of the best is how hype it is. The fight is a pure spectacle and it shows how far Oda has come in crafting fight scenes. While Oda's fights have never been outright terrible, they've mainly been alright apart from the main fights, and even then they've more been about the emotions, build-up, and subtext rather than being a well-crafted fight. This is not a fight of strength but a fight of willpower. A one-on-one match between two incredibly strong characters, and both characters in said fight benefited from it. On Luffy's side we saw how determined he was and how strong his willpower was, which is important because Haki is a power of will, and this fight had the purpose of vastly improving his observation Haki so that he'd stand a chance against not just the Yonko but the Yonko commanders as well. For Katakuri we saw his tragic backstory and how despite he wore a false face to hide himself from his family for fear of ridicule, he still loved them and was willing to protect them. We saw just how honorable he was in a fight, as when one of his sisters stabbed Luffy behind his back, Katakuri stabbed himself to make the fight more fair. That and towards the end of the fight, Katakuri, perhaps through his near-mastered observation Haki, or as a statement, that Luffy would be the Pirate King, albeit in the future a ways. Rock Lee vs Gaara. What makes this fight my number 5 is honestly just that it's incredibly iconic and hype. Not just seeing Rock Lee attempt a hidden lotus and zip everywhere, actually managing to damage Gaara's sand shield, which had been hyped up to be nearly impenetrable, but that moment when Lee stood atop that tower and removed his weights, everyone staring and laughing, doubting they were heavy, and when he finally did, boom. There was a loud crash and everyone's jaw was on the floor. And the rest is history. Lee almost won the fight and managed to rock Gaara's shit. Netero vs Miriam. What makes this fight my number 4 is not just how morally grey the arc was, what with the hunters being portrayed as the good guys but progressively using more and more violent tactics, and the chimera ants starting out as pure, vicious evil but eventually becoming more moral and human. What really makes this fight great is the spectacle of it and how funny it all was. Here we have two of the strongest characters in the series at this point in time, and neither are in their prime. That and Netero having a pretty awesome send-off. He was so prepared to die and was so full of anger that for the first time, Miriam felt fear. And while Miriam killed Netero first, Netero had a nuke installed so that when he died, it would explode. And sure, Miriam survived the initial blast and even got somewhat stronger, albeit being a bit fucked up. He ultimately succumbed to radiation poisoning, dying in the arms of the girl he had come to love and respect. Deku, Itza, and Todoroki vs Stain. What makes this fight my number 3 is that not only was it a great fight, but we really got to see the moral spectrum in My Hero Forever change. With the introduction and death of Stain, numerous other villains and plot points that are still relevant and being explored today came to be. Stain's ideology not only brought up good points, but it directly led to Itza taking revenge on him for injuring his brother, but Deku and Todoroki as well going vigilante by breaking the law and using their quirks to fight. Kaneki vs Jason. What makes this fight my number 2 is just how absolutely brutal it is. Jason kidnapped and tortured Kaneki so brutally that he went nearly insane for a time and learned how ghouls can receive a power-up of a sword, eating another ghoul. This fight in the series acted as a turning point in which Kaneki not only got stronger but truly embraced his ghoul side and was honestly accepted by the ghouls at Antioku. Shinichi vs Goto. What makes this fight my number 1 is the setup behind this. The main character, Shinichi, has had his body merged with the parasite and has came to terms with his own weakness and his humanity. And, realizing that he may not come out of it alive, he embraces his girlfriend once more, for it may be the last time he sees her. And so they share a night of passion, humanly depicted in such a way that you can feel every emotion that the characters are feeling. And with his final words given, Shinichi sets out to destroy Goto, a dangerous conglomerate of various parasite, vastly amplifying his strength and intelligence. The fight itself is brutal survival of wits, with Shinichi having naught but his enhancements as of a result of merging with Migi, despite Migi becoming separated later on. For much of the fight at least, it is a vicious game of cat and mouse, and thematically, it is the idea of one man, who in the series, as a species as a whole, had been set up to be physically weak but emotionally strong, against the parasites, incredibly physically strong and emotionless monsters. This is the fight in the series that best exemplifies the idea of man vs nature, or perhaps more aptly, nature vs nurture. Goto, being the perfect killing machine, and Shinichi, an imperfect human who was the only one who stood a chance at protecting humanity against him. After Goto is heavily wounded and nearly dead, Shinichi and Migi have a monologue on the nature of man and parasite, and whether or not they had a right to kill Goto, just because he had presented a threat to them, even in his current pitiful state. In the end, Shinichi kills Goto and silently walks away, leaving the blade he had been given by an old lady back at her place, without a word. And this is why I believe Shinichi vs Goto is the best fight in anime and manga.